This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
You've been eyeing the latest mid-range Samsung or Xiaomi smartphone and are waiting for a Diwali discount to make that purchase. Or that sleek Redmi notebook you wanted for a while? How about that upgraded laptop with just the specs you need for a smoother workflow? Well, there's a high chance they may soon get more expensive. Meanwhile, your friendly neighbourhood mobile retailer, the one who always informs you of the latest smartphone launches in the market, he has no stocks to sell in Diwali. His business is struggling to survive and he may shut shop soon.
The global chip shortage could be spreading from cars to smartphones. Reuters sources say Qualcomm is struggling to meet demand for semiconductors used in handsets and other gadgets. Key client Samsung reportedly can't get enough chips from the US manufacturer. Demand for Qualcomm processors has soared in recent months. One source at a Samsung supplier said the silicon drought was now hitting output of low and mid-range phones. One source at a major contract manufacturer for several brands said it would have to cut output later in the year.
Last Friday in part 1, I spoke about how a global shortage in semiconductor chips is affecting the businesses of automotive companies. Today, in part 2, I talk about its impact on mobile phones and personal computers. Welcome to the Morning Brief. This is Tuesday, the 24th of August, and I'm Anirban Chaudhary, your host this morning. Semiconductor chips are the brains of almost all smart electronic devices in the world. Phones, computers, smart television sets, refrigerators, cars, military-grade surveillance equipment, and even power grids. A chipset takes weeks to make, has to be ordered months in advance, and is manufactured by a handful of companies in very few countries: Taiwan, the US, South Korea, Japan, and China. Last year, when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, people confined themselves to their homes and shifted their work, their children's schooling, and all their material consumption online. Demand for phones and computers soared, and chip makers diverted supplies towards electronic appliances and equipment for upgraded mobile telephone networks. Meanwhile, shipping schedules went awry, factories were shut, and a trade war between the US and China happened. More recently, South Korean electronics giant Samsung had to shut its chip factory in Texas and its smartphone plants in Vietnam for weeks due to a snowstorm and an outbreak of COVID infections. Japanese chipmaker Renesas factory was damaged in a fire.
Industry executives and analysts say there are a number of issues behind the shortage. Bulk buying by Chinese tech giant Huawei Technologies, for one, after it was hit with US sanctions. Analysts say this was aggravated by rivals such as Xiaomi seeking to gain market share by stepping up orders of components. A fire at a chip plant in Japan has also impacted supply, as did lockdowns in Southeast Asia and a strike at a chip maker in France.
All this intensified the supply crunch even as demand continued to climb. Soon, handset and laptop makers across the world, the biggest consumers of these chipsets, began to be affected by the shortage. In April to June, the global smartphone market declined by 7% compared to the previous quarter, according to Counterpoint, a research firm. During the same quarter, personal computer shipments grew just 4.6% on year, much slower than the growth rate of 35.7% in January to March, as per Gartner, an advisory firm. The alarm bells really rang when Apple, which had so far been insulated from the shortage, was also hit.
In a conference call with investors, Apple executives also said while impact of chip shortage was less severe than feared, in third quarter it will get worse in fourth, extending to iPhone production.
In India, about 500 billion people, or 40% of the population, use smartphones. The number of PC users is just 50 million. Sales have been soaring since the second half of 2020. Smartphone sales touched a record 100 million units in the July to December period, with the highest ever festive season sales in October, according to IDC, a market intelligence firm. PC sales since July last year have been consistently close to or more than 3 million units every quarter, touching a 7-year high of 3.4 million in the July-September quarter 2020. But the supply constraints are being strongly felt now. Mobile phone companies are going into panic stocking for the festive season, while PC makers are trying hard to allocate more global supplies to India.
On the mobile side, the supply constraint started from July last year when the markets opened after the lockdown. And this has continued till now. The current chip shortage or the silicon shortage will continue, and brands are planning much advance for the upcoming festival season. PC makers are doing numbers which is way, way higher than what they could have imagined. Now the problem is with the supply. Demand is through the roof. So even after supply is at 110%, they're not able to meet the demand. So that's the problem. That will remain for foreseeable next 3 or 4 quarters.
That was Navkendar Singh of IDC India. Let's listen to what my colleague Devina Sengupta, ET's telecom reporter, has to say.
Samsung India smartphone sales team had warned the retailers in July that there could be a 70% shortfall in supplies of handsets. Then supplies from brands like Apple, HP, Lenovo, Dell, Xiaomi, OnePlus, Realme too have been hit. Even Indian manufacturers who are dependent on the chipsets from abroad were hit. And coming up in the Diwali and the festive season sale day, we will be seeing a major supply crunch where chances of a consumer walking into a retail outlet or ordering a smartphone online may not get the brand he or she picks.
The supply problems have added to costs, and that has led to price increases.
More than 85% of the phones are assembled in India. Many of the components are actually made in China. So they bring it here and they assemble it in various large factories, which all the brands have. You have to get allocation from the component suppliers, which are all over the world, including China. And when you have to get the allocation for your country or a particular brand, the prices of the components in the upper side of the value chain is increasing. And that's why the ultimate price of the consumer is also increasing. Then you bring it in India, you assemble in India, it all piles up. So that's why we have seen the average selling price of a phone in India has gone up about $185 from about $160, $165 about a year and a half back. This is all because of the component supply issues.
Remember that there are spikes in other expenses too. Shipping costs and freight rates have shot through the roof, and the rupee continues to be weak. Recently, the government withdrew incentives and levied additional duties on the import of some mobile phone components. Counterpoint has estimated that smartphone prices will increase by 4 to 5% before September ends.
We have seen prices of smartphones go up. In fact, early on in May, Xiaomi had mentioned that despite their best efforts, because of the shortage in chipset supply, they have been forced to increase prices of their smartphone.
Let's now talk about the impact of the shortage on Indian retailers. Before the pandemic, about 40% of all mobiles and 35% of PCs were sold online. The rest was sold in offline shops and multi-brand retail outlets such as Chroma, owned by the Tata Group, and Reliance Digital, among others. During the pandemic, e-tailers quickly widened their market share to 50% in the space and are now the preferred channel of sales for mobile and laptop brands. As stockpiles get crunched just before the festive season, brands are sending larger chunks of those stocks to the big e-commerce players. The mom-and-pop stores are starved of business just before their most profitable time of the year.
At the current position, there are no stocks. We are at zero-level stocks. Maybe only 10%, 5% or 10% of stocks, and only those stocks which are either the slow-moving handsets or the dead models. There are no new models in stock. They are just promising that we'll deliver you stock. The majority are fast-selling models below 10,000. From last 25 days, there is no stock. What is the reason that the stocks are available in online and not in offline? A, it is profitable for the brands. B, they dump their stocks to the e-commerce, and e-commerce is doing flash sales. in a tier 2, tier 3 cities, there's a new breed of retailers. We call them aggregators. So they buy in bulk from this e-commerce and they further supply without GST. Now, this smaller retailer, he is compromising on the ethics and buying those stocks and selling at his shops, and his OPEX is less. But what about the mid-sized retailers? They are into a scoop. They are into a challenge because they are downsizing their shops. They are not able to grow, and they are trying to add on some more products to survive. That is the changing scenario in the industry.
That was Arvinder Khurana, head of the All India Mobile Retailers Association, a lobbying body. Khurana told me that thousands of offline store owners have gone out of business in the last 2 years. Those in smaller towns have been the worst affected.
Their problem also is that retailers have a store to support, they have staff to support. Their rentals are also high. So it is a question of their survival right now. What a lot of offline retailers therefore are also doing is they are keeping other electronic personal gadgets. So for example, you might walk into a mobile only retail store and buy a mobile phone, but at the same time you may also be given a car kettle, a baby monitor, a robo cleaner. These were not available in mobile only retail stores. But now they are looking at diversifying their product portfolio to survive.
In part 1, I spoke about how the government is pushing for indigenous production of semiconductor wafers. It's in fact willing to incentivize companies to get into the segment. Remember, India imports 70% of its electronics requirement, which will shortly touch a whopping $500 billion. So higher self-sufficiency is definitely the way forward. But is it easy? Not at all, as Sanjay Gupta, India head of American semiconductor maker NXP, tells us.
It's not easy to develop a semiconductor wafer fab. One simple reason is it's extremely capital incentive. It requires billions of dollars to set up an advanced or even a current technologies manufactured through a fab.
And it's high maintenance.
You're talking about literally creating something which cannot be seen by naked eye. Every single semiconductor chip has literally millions of transistors and trillions of wires which connect these transistors to each other. They are so thin that you cannot see with the naked eye. They are designed using some of the very sophisticated techniques, and that is what requires it such a high level of precision and cost. And precision is so much that if there is a impurity in the air to the tone of even a 1 part per million or a one dust particle in a million, it can cause your chip to malfunction.
And there's the omnipresent question of demand and supply.
Let's assume hypothetically you have a perfect partner who is willing to put a lot of capital money with the hope that it will come back in terms of revenue. But where is the revenue pipeline? Right? Where is the demand? The running cost of a fab to maintain that environment is very high, and I believe it will run into hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. Now, if you are pumping out hundreds of thousands of dollars as a running cost every day, you need to have a complete lineup of customers so that your fab is not sitting idle for a single day.
So, how does the rest of the year look for handset and laptop makers? And most importantly, when are they going to get out of this mess? We will let the guests leave us with the last word.
For the mobile phone, smartphone market, last year, 2020, was about 150 million in a year. This time we expect anywhere around 160 to 162. So that's about 8.5% kind of annual growth. For PCs, so we expect somewhere around 14 million units to be happening this year. 2020 was around 10.5 million units. So that's a growth of about 37% over 2020.
Chipset shortage is there right now, but by 2022, as the world gets used to living with the pandemic, this should be behind us.
In this 2-part episode, you saw how the shortage of semiconductor chips, tiny things that barely fit your little fingernail, is making dents in some of the most massive businesses in the world. When will this crisis end? Only time will tell. That's it for today. I'm Anirban Chaudhary and you've been listening to The Morning Brief. This episode was edited and coordinated by Bhavya Dilip Kumar. Do write to us at themorningbrief@timesgroup.com. This podcast airs every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Thank you and have a great day. All clips used in this episode belong to their original respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description below.